The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath the dome. The walls were lined with the banners of 100 different species. Ambassador Kyle Bennett stood at the human delegation's podium and felt very small. He had been to this chamber many times before. He had stood at this same podium and argued for human rights, human representation, and human dignity. And every single time, the answer had been the same. No, not yet. Perhaps later. Your kind is still too young. Today would be different. Kyle could feel it in his bones. The question was whether it would be different in a good way or a bad way. High Counselor Tethvara rose from his elevated seat at the center of the chamber. He was a Velinid, one of the oldest species in the known galaxy. His body was made of living crystal that shifted colors with his mood. Right now, it was a cold, dismissive blue. The Council has reviewed humanity's petition for increased representation, Tethvara announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. We have also reviewed your objections to the proposed taxation on human trade vessels. Kyle held his breath. Beside him, his aide, Carla Morrison, gripped her datapad so tightly her knuckles turned white. The Council has determined that humanity's contributions to the Galactic Union are adequate but replaceable, Tethvara continued. Your request for increased representation is denied. The taxation will proceed as scheduled. The words hit Kyle like a punch to the stomach. He had expected rejection. He had prepared for it. But hearing it spoken aloud in this ancient chamber still hurt more than he had anticipated. Carla leaned close and whispered in his ear, 300 years of service, and they call us replaceable. She was right. For 3 centuries, humanity had given everything to this union. When the Kreth swarm had invaded the outer systems 50 years ago, it was human soldiers who had held the line at Epsilon Gate. Kyle's own grandfather had died in that battle, along with 40,000 other humans. The aliens had called them heroes then. They had given speeches about human courage and human sacrifice, and now they called humanity replaceable. When the Fenari plague had swept through the western arm of the galaxy, it was human doctors who had worked day and night to find a cure. They had saved 4 entire species from extinction. The grateful aliens had promised eternal friendship. They had erected statues in human honor on a dozen worlds, but those statues were gathering dust now, and the friendship had proven to be worth very little. When the hyperspace lanes had collapsed after the void storm, it was human engineers who had rebuilt them. Other species had said it would take 50 years. Human crews had done it in 20. The Union had thrown a celebration. They had given humanity a new colony world as thanks. That colony world had turned out to be toxic. The soil was poisoned with heavy metals. The atmosphere was barely breathable. Humans had made it work anyway, because that was what humans did. They survived. They adapted. They solved problems that other species considered impossible, and their reward was this: a cold blue alien calling them replaceable. Kyle activated his personal communicator and sent a brief message to Earth. The response came almost immediately. Secretary General Patricia Lane appeared on his wrist display. She was an older woman with silver hair and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. They rejected everything, Kyle reported. His voice was flat and empty. Patricia nodded slowly. Her expression did not change. She had clearly expected this outcome. Very well. Initiate protocol farewell. Kyle felt his heart begin to pound. Protocol farewell. They had talked about it for years. They had planned for it. They had hoped they would never need to use it. But the time had finally come. He cleared his throat and stepped forward. The chamber fell silent. Every alien eye turned toward the human ambassador. Esteemed members of the Galactic Council, Kyle began. His voice was steady now. The uncertainty was gone. Humanity accepts your decision. Tethvara's crystal body flickered with confusion. This was not the response he had expected, Kyle continued. Effective immediately. The human species is withdrawing from the Galactic Union. All human personnel, technology, and resources will be recalled to Earth within 90 standard days. The chamber erupted in chaos. Aliens shouted in a dozen different languages. Translators struggled to keep up with the flood of protests and questions. Tethvaris slammed his gavel against the podium, demanding order. "You cannot simply leave," the High Counselor sputtered. "The treaties forbid such action." Carla stepped forward with her datapad raised. "The treaties permit withdrawal with adequate notice." Section 7, Article 23. "We have reviewed the documents thoroughly. 90 days is more than sufficient." Tethvaris' crystal form shifted from blue to an angry orange. But the hyperspace maintenance crews are almost entirely human. The medical stations depend on human doctors. The defense networks were designed by human engineers, as Kyle agreed calmly. They were. And those humans will be coming home. "You cannot do this," Tethvara repeated. His voice had lost its commanding tone. He sounded almost desperate now. Kyle looked around the chamber at the assembled aliens. He saw Velenids and Fenari and Corvani and Thessans. He saw Chitani and Draven and Morlocks and a dozen other species whose names he could barely pronounce. For 300 years, humanity had served them all. Humans had bled for them and died for them and built wonders for them, and they had called humanity replaceable. "Good luck, Counselor," Kyle said quietly. "You will need it." He turned and walked toward the exit. Carla fell into step beside him. Behind them, the chamber continued to erupt in chaos. Aliens were screaming at each other now, pointing fingers and assigning blame. "Do you think they understand what they have done?" Carla asked as they stepped through the massive doors. Kyle shook his head. "Not yet, but they will soon." The doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. Outside, the sky of Nexer Prime was a beautiful shade of purple. 2 moons hung low on the horizon, their light painting the clouds in shades of silver and gold. It was a lovely world. Kyle had always enjoyed his visits here. He suspected he would not be back for a very long time. His communicator buzzed with incoming messages. Human ambassadors and officials across the galaxy were receiving the same orders. The withdrawal had begun. After 300 years of loyal service, humanity was going home, and the galaxy was about to learn just how replaceable they really were. 60 days had passed since humanity announced its withdrawal from the Galactic Union. 60 days of chaos and confusion and growing fear. The galaxy was beginning to understand what it had lost. Lieutenant Commander Derek Hale stood on the bridge of the starship Endurance and watched the last human cargo vessels. Undocked from Starbase Orion, the station was enormous, home to nearly 20 million souls from a dozen different species. It hung in space like a great metal flower, its petals reaching out toward the stars. Derek had spent 3 years on this station. He had made friends here. He had fallen in love here, though that relationship had ended badly. He had thought of this place as a second home. Now he was leaving it. Forever. The station's administrator was a Fenari named Yist. He was a gentle creature with pale fur and large sad eyes. He had come to the docking bay personally to beg Derek to reconsider. "Your engineers are the only ones who understand the reactor systems," Yist had pleaded. His voice was thin and desperate. "If those reactors fail, 20 million people will die. Men, women, children. Please, Lieutenant Commander, please do not abandon us." Derek had felt genuine sympathy for the old Fenari. The Fenari had always been relatively kind to humans. They did not look down on humanity the way the Velenids did. They did not treat humans like servants the way the Corvani did. But kindness was not the same as justice. The Fenari had never spoken up at the council. They had never defended humanity when it mattered. They had accepted the benefits of human labor while remaining silent about human suffering. "I am sorry," Derek had said. "Truly I am. But you should have spoken up at the council. You should have stood with us when we needed you." Yist had lowered his head in shame. He had no answer because there was no answer. The Fenari had been silent when it mattered. Now they would pay the price. Derek turned away from the viewport and activated a communication link to his sister. Nina Hale was a trauma surgeon stationed at the Corvani Medical Hub, one of the largest hospitals in the galaxy. Her face appeared on the screen, and Derek felt a wave of concern wash over him. She looked exhausted. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, and her usually neat hair was tangled and messy. "Derek," she said, her voice heavy with fatigue, "it is chaos here. Absolute chaos. Tell me." Nina rubbed her eyes and sighed. "I have been training Corvini surgeons for the past month, but they just cannot do it. Their hands are not designed for delicate work. They have always relied on automated surgical machines, but those machines were programmed by humans. Without us to maintain them, the machines are starting to fail. How much longer until you are evacuated? 2 weeks. Maybe less if they can arrange transport." Nina paused and looked away from the camera. "But the patients keep coming. There was a cargo ship collision in the Theta Corridor yesterday. 47 casualties. I am the only one qualified to handle the burn cases." Derek felt his throat tighten. He knew his sister. She had become a doctor because she wanted to help people. Walking away from patients in need went against everything she believed in. "Nina, listen to me. You are not abandoning them. They abandoned us first. Remember that." Nina nodded slowly, but Derek could see the pain in her eyes. She would follow orders. She would come home. But a part of her would always wonder if she had done the right thing. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out in every corner of Union space. Human. Hyperspace navigators left their posts at the great transit stations. Within a week, 3 major shipping lanes suffered catastrophic navigation failures. Ships emerged from hyperspace in the wrong locations. Some materialized inside asteroids or too close to stars. Thousands died in accidents that could have been easily prevented. Human. Soldiers withdrew from the border outposts that guarded against the Kreth swarm. The Kreth were a hostile species of insectoid creatures that viewed all other life forms as food. For decades, human soldiers had kept them at bay through a combination of skill, courage, and stubborn determination. Without humans to guard the borders, the Kreth began testing the perimeter. They sent scout ships to probe for weaknesses. They launched small raids against isolated colonies. The other species tried to fill the gap, but they lacked the training and the will to fight the way humans did. Human diplomats departed from Fragile. Peace negotiations across a dozen worlds. Conflicts that had been dormant for centuries began to reignite. Old enemies remembered old grudges. Without human mediators to keep the peace, the galaxy began to tear itself apart. On the planet Viridian, a young human farmer named Lucas Grant loaded his family's agricultural equipment onto a transport shuttle. His daughter Sophie helped him carry the lighter boxes, her small hands working quickly despite her confusion.
Why are we leaving?"
Sophie asked. She was only 8 years old, too young to understand politics and treaties and galactic councils. Lucas knelt down to look into his daughter's eyes. "Because the people here do not want us anymore, sweetheart. So we are going home, but I like it here. I have friends here." Lucas felt his heart break a little. "I know, baby. I know." The Viridians had gathered to watch the humans leave. They were tall, slender creatures with multiple eyes and skin that changed color with their emotions. Right now, their skin was a deep shade of gray, the color of sorrow. An elder named Orith approached Lucas as he finished loading the shuttle. Orith was very old, nearly 200 years by human standards. He had known Lucas's grandfather, who had first come to Viridian to teach the natives how to farm. "Please," Orith said, his many eyes glistening with moisture. "Who will teach our children now? Who will show them how to grow food from the soil?" For 50 years, the Grant family had taught the Viridians how to cultivate crops on their own world. Before the humans came, the Viridians had relied entirely on imported nutrients shipped from other planets. They had never learned to feed themselves. Lucas hoisted his bag onto his shoulder and took Sophie's hand. "You will have to teach them yourselves now. That is what we should have insisted on from the beginning." He led Sophie onto the shuttle and did not look back. Behind him, the Viridians watched in silence as the last humans lifted off from their world. On Earth, Secretary General Patricia Lane watched reports flooding in from across the galaxy. Medical emergencies. navigation disasters, military incursions, diplomatic collapses. Everything was falling apart exactly as she had predicted. Her chief of staff, Martin Cole, stood beside her with a grim expression. It is worse than we expected. They really had no backup plans for any of this. Patricia nodded slowly. They never thought we would actually leave. They believed we would always be there to clean up their messes and solve their problems. And now. Patricia looked out the window at the blue sky of Earth. For the first time in 300 years, humanity was coming home. Now they learned the truth. We were never replaceable. We were the only thing holding their precious union together. The stars were burning, and the galaxy was finally waking up to what it had lost. Day 87. Only 3 days remained before the final deadline. The Galactic Council chamber had become a place of fear and desperation. The beautiful banners that once hung proudly on the walls were now crooked and dusty. The cleaning staff had been mostly human, and they were gone now. Nobody had thought to replace them. High Counselor Tethvara stood at his podium and tried to maintain order. But order had become impossible. His crystalline body had lost its beautiful shine. Cracks had formed across his chest and arms, a sign of extreme stress in his species. He looked like a statue that was slowly falling apart. The chamber was packed with representatives. From every species in the Union, they were all shouting at once. Translators struggled to keep up with the flood of words. The noise was deafening. Kreth had breached the outer rim, screamed Ambassador Vorin of the Thesan Collective. He was a large, muscular creature, covered in thick scales. His people were warriors, proud and fierce, but right now, his voice was filled with terror. 3 colony worlds have gone dark. We sent rescue ships, but they were destroyed before they could even reach the planets. The medical stations are failing, cried the Corvani delegate. She was a small creature with delicate features and 4 arms. Her species had always been known for their intelligence and their skill with technology. But their technology had been designed by humans, and without humans to maintain it, everything was breaking down. Mortality rates have increased by 400%. Our people are dying from diseases that should be easily curable. Hyperspace travel has become impossible, wailed a tiny insectoid creature from the Chitani swarm. The Chitani were a hive species that lived on massive ships that drifted through space. They depended on hyperspace lanes to move between star systems. Without those lanes, they were trapped. Our hive ships are stranded across 6 systems. Millions of our children are starving because supply ships cannot reach them. Tethvara slammed his gavel against the podium. The sound echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. Silence. All of you, silence. We must find a solution. But there was no solution. Everyone in the chamber knew it. The solution had been right in front of them for 300 years, and they had thrown it away. A quiet voice spoke from the back of the chamber. The solution is obvious. Everyone turned to look. An elderly Fenari stood near the entrance. It was Yist, the administrator of Starbase Orion. He had traveled all the way from his station to attend this emergency session. His pale fur was matted and dirty. His large eyes were red from lack of sleep. He looked like he had aged 20 years in the past 3 months. We must ask the humans to return, Yist said simply. Ambassador Vorin let out a harsh laugh. Impossible. We cannot show such weakness. The humans will think they have power over us. They do have power over us, Yist replied calmly. They always did. We were simply too blind and too proud to see it. Vorin snarled and stepped toward the old Fenari. You dare speak to me of pride? My people have been warriors for 10,000 years. We do not beg. We do not grovel. Then your people will die, Yist said. There was no anger in his voice, only sadness. The Kreth are coming, and you cannot stop them without human soldiers. Your wounded warriors will bleed to death on battlefields because there are no human doctors to save them. Your ships will be lost in hyperspace because there are no human navigators to guide them. Chamber fell silent. Vorin opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. He knew the old Fenari was right. Yist walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. Every eye followed him. I watched the last human ship leave. Starbase Orion. The commander was a young man named Derek Hale. Do you know what he said to me before he left? Nobody answered. He said I should have spoken up at the council. He said I should have defended humanity when it mattered. Just paused and looked around at the assembled aliens. And he was right. I should have. We all should have. Instead, we allowed our prejudice and our pride to blind us to the truth. He stopped in the center of the chamber and raised his voice so everyone could hear. Humanity was not our burden. They were our backbone. They held this union together with their labor and their courage and their compassion, and we repaid them with contempt. Tethvara's crystal form flickered with shame. The cracks in his body seemed to deepen. What would you have us do, Administrator? The humans have made their position clear. They do not wish to return. Then we must change their minds, Yes said. We must give them a reason to come back. On Earth, Secretary General Patricia Lane watched the council session on a large screen in her office. Her senior advisors sat around a conference table, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple displays. Chief of Staff Martin Cole shook his head in amazement. They are actually considering it. They might actually beg us to come back. Admiral Grace Sullivan leaned forward in her chair. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and a face that showed decades of military service. The question is, what we do if they ask. Do we go back? Patricia did not answer immediately. She watched the screen as Yist continued to speak to the council. The old Fenari was making a passionate argument for reaching out to humanity. Some of the other delegates were nodding along. Others still looked resistant. That depends, Patricia finally said. It depends on whether they are truly sorry or whether they just want us to fix their problems again. Martin frowned. How will we know the difference? We will know by what they offer. If they come to us with empty words and vague promises, we stay home. But if they come with real change, real commitment to treating us as equals, then we consider it. Admiral Sullivan crossed her arms. And if they refuse to change? If they expect us to come crawling back on their terms? Patricia turned away from the screen and looked out the window. The sun was setting over the capital city. The sky was painted in beautiful shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, beyond the atmosphere, the stars were waiting.
Us.
Then the galaxy burns, Patricia said quietly, and we watch from a safe distance. It was a harsh thing to say. Patricia knew that millions of innocent beings would suffer if the Union collapsed. Children would starve. The sick would die. Entire civilizations might fall to the Kreth swarm, but humanity had suffered for 300 years. They had given everything and received nothing in return. They had earned the right to demand better. The council session continued late into the night. Arguments raged back and forth. Old alliances crumbled and new ones formed. By the time the session ended, one thing had become clear. The Galactic Union was going to reach out to humanity. They were going to ask the humans to return. The only question was whether humanity would say yes. 6 months had passed since humanity agreed to return to the Galactic Union. 6 months of rebuilding and healing and learning to trust again. The galaxy was slowly coming back to life. Ambassador Kyle Bennett stood in the Galactic Council chamber and looked around at the changes. The last time he had been here, he had walked out in anger and disgust. He had believed he would never return. But here he was, standing at a podium that was now equal in height to every other species representative. It was a small change, but it meant everything. For 300 years, the human podium had been lower than the others. It had been a subtle reminder of humanity's place in the Union. Now that reminder was gone. Carla Morrison stood beside him, her eyes bright with cautious hope. She had been promoted to deputy ambassador after their dramatic departure from the council. She had earned it. It feels different this time, she whispered to Kyle. He nodded slowly. It does. But we must remain watchful. Words are easy. Actions are what matter. The chamber was bustling with activity, unlike anything Kyle had ever seen. Human engineers worked alongside Velinid technicians to upgrade the communication systems. They laughed together and shared meals together. 6 months ago, such a sight would have been unthinkable. In the medical wing of the council complex, human doctors consulted with Corvani specialists on new treatment protocols. The Corvani had finally admitted that their automated systems could not replace human skill and intuition. They were learning to work with humans as partners, rather than treating them as convenient tools. Outside the chamber, in the vast training grounds that surrounded the council complex, human soldiers drilled side by side with warriors from a dozen different worlds. They were preparing for joint operations against the Kreth swarm. The enemy had been pushed back from the borders, but they had not been defeated. The war would continue for years, perhaps decades. But for the first time, the Union was fighting as a united force. High Counselor Tethvara called the session to order. His crystalline body had regained some of its former luster, though the stress cracks remained. They would never fully heal. They were a permanent reminder of the crisis that had nearly destroyed everything. The Galactic Council recognizes the representative from Earth, Tethvara announced. His voice carried a note of respect that had never been there before. Kyle stepped forward and looked out at the assembled delegates. He saw Velonids and Fenari and Corvani and Thissons. He saw Chitani and Draven and Morlocks and many others. These were the same species that had dismissed humanity as replaceable. These were the same beings who had taken human sacrifice for granted. But they were also the beings who had humbled themselves and begged humanity to return. They had admitted their mistakes. They had agreed to change. Fellow members of the Union, Kyle began, humanity is honored to resume our place among you. But we do not come as the workers you once relied upon without gratitude. We do not come as servants to clean your messes and solve your problems. We come as equals, ready to build a future that benefits all our peoples. A ripple of applause spread through the chamber. It was not the polite, obligatory applause that Kyle remembered from his previous visits. This was genuine. The delegates were actually happy to have humans back. In the visitor gallery above the main floor, Lieutenant Commander Derek Hale sat with his sister Nina. Both of them were still in uniform. They had volunteered to return to Union space, not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in the mission. Derek leaned close to his sister and whispered, "Do you think it will last? Do you think they have really changed?" Nina smiled and pointed toward the far side of the gallery. A young Fenari student was eagerly questioning a human surgeon about advanced medical techniques. The surgeon was patient and kind, explaining complex procedures in simple terms. The Fenari listened with genuine fascination. "I think it has a real chance this time," Nina said. "They are not just using us anymore. They are learning from us. That is the difference." Derek nodded slowly. He wanted to believe his sister was right. He wanted to believe that the suffering of the past few months had actually meant something. But he had been hurt too many times to fully trust. On the planet Viridian, Lucas Grant had returned to his farm. The fields that had gone untended during his absence were overgrown with weeds. The irrigation systems had broken down. The crops had withered and died. But Lucas was not alone this time. Orith, the elder, worked beside him, pulling weeds with his 4 arms. A dozen other Viridians had joined them, learning the techniques that the Grant family had taught for 50 years. "Why do you humans always want to teach?" Orith asked one afternoon. The sun was setting over the fields, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. "Other species guard their knowledge like treasure, but you share it freely." "Why?" Lucas paused and leaned on his farming tool. He thought about the question for a long moment. His daughter Sophie ran past, laughing as she chased a small local creature through the growing crops. "Because we remember what it was like to struggle alone," Lucas finally said. "Back on Earth, before we reached the stars, humanity went through terrible times. Wars and famines and plagues. We nearly destroyed ourselves more than once." Orith listened in silence, his many eyes focused on the human. "But we survived," Lucas continued. "We survived because we learned to help each other. We learned that sharing knowledge makes everyone stronger. We learned that no one should have to suffer alone." He smiled and picked up his tool again. "That is why we teach. Because we never want anyone else to feel the way we once felt." Orith was quiet for a long time. Then he bowed his head in a gesture of deep respect. "Your people are wiser than we knew. We were fools to treat you as we did." Yes, Lucas agreed simply. "You were, but wisdom can be learned. That is what we are here to teach." In orbit above Earth, Admiral Grace Sullivan commanded the newly formed Joint Defense Fleet. Her flagship was surrounded by warships from 12 different species. Velinid cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Thesan battleships coordinated with Fenari support vessels. It was the largest combined fleet in the history of the galaxy. The Kreth swarm had been pushed back to their original territory. The borders were secure for the first time in a century. But Grace knew the war was not over. The Kreth would return. They always did. But this time, they would face a united galaxy. And at the heart of that unity stood humanity. In her office on Earth, Secretary General Patricia Lane received a message from High Counselor Tethvara. She read it slowly, letting each word sink in. Thank you for returning. Thank you for forgiving. And thank you for showing us what true partnership means. The galaxy is better for having humanity in it. We will never forget that lesson again. Patricia set down the message and walked to her window. The night sky was clear, and the stars shone bright and beautiful. For 300 years, humanity had wandered among those stars, seeking acceptance and recognition. They had found neither, but now things were different. Humanity had finally found its place in the galaxy. Not as servants, not as tools, not as a convenient workforce to be used and discarded. They had found their place as equals. As partners, as the backbone of a union that had finally learned to appreciate them. Patricia smiled and whispered to the stars. We did it. We finally did it. And somewhere out in the vast darkness of space, the galaxy whispered back, "Welcome home."